website. So please welcome Andrew Herzog, living in New York. Am I correct?
Yeah,
right.
New York City.
Making people nervous in New York with all kind of crazy experiments. Is that correct?
Hopefully not, but maybe sometimes. There's been a few.
You didn't get any requests or any demands to change the scope of your work?
Not yet. No. Actually, it's been quite the opposite. We've kind of found that people are interested in like seeing a little bit outside the normal.
Right. So among other things, different things, so you designed a natural wayfinding system for New York City pedestrians.
Yes.
An app that translates distance into objects.
Yeah.
And apparently, one that is really important for me, an app for understanding sarcasm.
Yes. Yeah, which is also very important for me as well, as I speak mostly in sarcasm, so have a lot of friends that are not as well versed in it.
So we can translate into basic.
Yeah, so it's mostly for
If
them. It was
necessary.
all the times when they didn't understand.
All right. So, so you're working on really lots of different creative projects, and I think that there are many designers have a bit of afraid of being too creative, because what you want to build is basically you want to solve a problem for your clients.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So they come to you, you want to build a product that looks nice, the interface is beautiful, and everything. You don't want to break usability. You don't want to break kind of predictability of the interface by being too creative. You don't want to appear like you're, totally out of space. It will be memorable, and there are really crazy experimental websites that are memorable, but you also want to be functional.
Yeah.
So how do you balance them out? Should we be more creative? Should we be more functional? Is there a place for everything in the world?
I think there's like a time and a place for everything. I think it depends on the message and what you're actually trying to communicate. I think like there's really great spaces for doing really experimental work and stuff that's actually really probably not usable for the most part. There's a place for that in the world, and I think there's also a place for doing work that's a little bit more cohesive and actually maybe answers like a larger brand story and helps to communicate like what that brand has kind of been establishing for years, or maybe they want to do something that's a little bit out of the box, and so that falls into the other category. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is what is the communication that you're trying to get across through interaction or through whatever you're making, and what kind of fits in those.
But I also think that there are actually places where you can be both creative and functional.
Yeah.
The one doesn't exclude the other.
Yeah.
And I think, do you see any products, like really kind of prominent products that appear that they combine both, kind of best of both worlds, where they're both really delightful in a way and at the same time really functional, really working well?
I do, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot in that category. The first thing that comes to mind when you kind of bring that up is like Snapchat, or like things that are kind of in the social media sphere that are kind of on the fringes of like user experience, and they're kind of like testing and like publishing right away. They're kind of making stuff and then having people use it pretty much simultaneously, which I think kind of like informs the understanding of how people are interacting with stuff, and then helps to kind of like further what we know as like interaction design, or what we know as like the standards and the things that people expect.
Right. And so when you start working on those creative projects, what is your starting point usually? Do you have this crazy idea in the bathroom and you say, you know what, I should do this today. This is it. I'm not going to stop until I get it done, and then I'll just see what happens. Or do you stop yourself sometimes thinking, oh, this is a bit too crazy. I should not do this.
Well, I don't know if there's too crazy. I mean, certainly too crazy. That's. I think it depends. Like some projects come from experiences that I have. Like the natural navigation project came from being on a camping trip, seeing moss in the wild on a rock and on trees and stuff like that, and then just being interested in thinking about it in like what it would be like in New York City and the juxtaposition of the two. And then other projects that are maybe more functional and actually usable, I think kind of require like a good amount of thought put towards them, and really considering like what has been done prior to this in this sphere, and then like what can you change, or what can you make better or differently. That's kind of what interests me a lot. The studio that I've just recently started, called Hallraff, one of the things that I think we try to focus on a lot is like taking what exists, or the paradigms that people have kind of established, and thinking about ways to do them differently, or kind of update them, and not just trying to like continue along this perpetuation of kind of what's already been made.
Right. But when you see like the interfaces around us, it feels very often that we tend to be a bit more reserved when it comes to experimental, to creative.
Yeah.
We tend to stay on the safe side. Do you think that we should be seeing more crazy experimental layouts which totally break the web and try to break technology as much as possible?
I think there is a lot of that work going on. I think it's kind of like very much on the fringes and on the peripheries of what probably we consider like usable interfaces. But I think that like designers that are working specifically on like very usable interfaces should probably be cognizant of the stuff that is going on in the fringes and in the like very experimental spaces. Because like I said, like with Snapchat and things like that, like those are informing younger generations of kids that are using apps for the first time, and the paradigms that those are creating should then start to be like cycled into these apps that are like a bit more ubiquitous with our everyday life. That being said, I also don't want to open up like my Gmail every day and have like a totally different interface, and I'm like, well, what the hell? I pressed this button yesterday, it did this, today it does something different.
Well, I think there is some value in actually people doing really experimental and really breaking crazy things. For example, sometimes you see people creating Homer Simpsons in CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and you think, why? Why does it exist? It doesn't serve any purpose. And of course it doesn't, but people are trying to kind of push the boundaries of what we think is possible with technology. And if as a result somebody then thinks, oh, maybe I can apply some ideas or concepts behind it into it, then I'm totally up for it.
Yeah, and I think like part of that, and part of what like some of the kind of stranger projects that I've done or that I publish is about breaking the medium as well. It's what can you apply to a medium that people don't typically think of as interactive, and kind of like what can you learn from that experiment that you can then bring back to the digital sphere and the digital work that you're making.
Right.
I've always found that that's been like, I don't know, kind of like an inspiration for me, or like something that I do a lot to kind of like reset, like get out of this like totally like maybe digital space if I'm working in it and just do something that's very physical, and then kind of think about the things that you learn in that space that you can apply to.
So what are some of the stranger things that you are not proud of, maybe? That you designed or put out in this world?
I don't know that I'm like not proud of anything.
People are watching,
Yeah. I don't know that I'm not proud of anything. I'm pretty proud of, well, all the work that you could probably find, I'm pretty proud of. I don't know that I've made any work in the past couple of years that I'm not proud of, because I think
maybe just strange, because you were talking about some of the stranger projects.
Well, yeah. So like the stranger projects being like the natural navigation system. So like going around New York City, covering things in moss because moss faces north, and then the idea that if someone knows that and they're lost and they're around one of those objects, they can find their way. Obviously, there's a lot of parts of that are not exactly work. But then, like, I've built a lot of stuff. I built a ladder that has uneven rungs on it. That's kind of like an exercise in, like, things that we kind of take for granted, like usability that we take for granted.
Right. But I think what's really important about them from designer's perspective is that if you have something like this, if you just work on a product like this or on a side project like this, you're learning a lot on your own. So I feel like it's very common for many designers to have some little beautiful playground, like a side project where they can play. And this brings you then into exploring new technologies, new concepts, new methodologies, kind of maybe meeting people, like-minded people who are working in very different fields, right? Absolutely. So if you at some point come up with a interesting navigation systems for lawyers or whatever, that, you never know.
I think that's really important as well. The studio that I work with is part of New Inc., which is an incubator program that the New Museum in New York City runs, and it houses people that are doing all sorts of stuff, from musicians to designers to technologists. There's a person there who's working on redesigning the Braille alphabet, and it's really, I think, like important to find spaces like that where designers are not just talking to other designers about design stuff. They're actually talking about other things that are happening in the world and getting like totally different perspectives from like your typical like design day job sort of stuff. And so for me, like not because I don't like designers, like I try to avoid like going to the same design events all the time and seeing the same people, because the conversations end up a bit stale,
Yes.
in my opinion, sometimes. And sometimes it can be really refreshing and really inspirational to see what would a navigation system for a lawyer be like. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
And then kind of like
Exactly. Yeah, actually, at some point of my life, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I went to a meetup, a lawyer's meetup, pretended to be a lawyer. I learned a lot. And the best part is actually they have very similar concept that we do.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of like how do you approach a problem strategically, and
And how do you communicate?
wireframing in a way
Yeah.
where they have to like have bored with all these ideas. So
Yeah.
you can actually learn a lot from them as well. Wow, many questions all of a sudden coming in. Many
Let's
questions.
go.
So, is there a good strategy for trying to be experimental in more serious systems, business systems? For example, with beta programs.
I think that like what's probably the best way to approach that sort of stuff is to kind of separate from what you're trying to get out of it in the first place. I think if you approach like experimentation with the idea that we need to experiment so that we can make this better or we can figure this out. I think that it's difficult to like end up with something that's going to be useful for that because you're starting out already thinking about one thing, and really like with experimentation, I think a lot of times the best way to go about it is to start completely away from what you're actually maybe hoping that it benefits, which maybe is not very useful sounding at all. But I think that giving that space for experimentation is very, very precious, and using it wisely rather than using it to try and like execute something is the best way to go about it.
Right. Interesting question from Denise. What is it like to work as a thinker at Google? Because most people at Google measure.
Well, like I said, I just recently left Google and I worked in what was called the Creative Lab there. And it was a very interesting place to work. It was a small group, about 50 to 70 people, depending on the projects that are going on. And it's comprised of like designers and developers and filmmakers and writers and strategists, business people. And I think everyone there kind of thinks of themselves as a thinker or works in that way. And I think what's most important, like being a thinker, is just kind of like taking your everyday life and really being very critical of everything that you're doing and thinking about ways that it could be better or ways that it could be different, and not just necessarily always taking something for what it is and kind of like only expecting it to work in that way.
Right. Okay. More questions. What is the benefit of testing new designs on websites and apps and giving them to the public instead of testing them before releasing them live?
That's a really great question. And I think when you're making something for the public, it's often a lot of times better to be communicating with them while you're making. I mean, a lot of people speak about prototyping and things like that, rapid prototyping, and which we kind of do a lot. But at the same time, if you're not communicating with like who you're actually making something for, and you're not understanding what they want out of it, then I think you're kind of like losing what you're actually doing. You're just like assuming that you know best, but really, if you know, even when you are the target, there's still a lot of other people.
That's an interesting question, because for many designers, well, they know the best. They know what they're doing. Well, some designers would say, no, we need to test everything, every single shade of every single button. We need to test everything, right? And so right now we're also working on the redesign, and for us it will be important to really kind of make it available in public, and then just see what it's like. It's not going to be like fully functional, but we need to kind of have this, initiate this dialogue or conversation with the audience to figure out, okay, what is it right? Is it going in the right direction or not? So would you be the one who says, I know what to do? I think we should kind of invest more of the designer's vision into this product, despite what people say, users say? Or you would say, well, we should kind of maybe roll back the design a little bit, and we should listen more to our users?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it really depends on what it is that you're making. I think like with the Adobe stuff, it's a tool for designers, designed by designers. And so to not be like listening to what designers have to say is really difficult, I think, because like it's a tool, and at the end of the day, like it has to be expansive, it has to be robust. I think in the case where you're maybe designing more like one-way type of like communication platforms or things like that, I think you need to like have a concept and have an idea of how you want to communicate up front. But I think like the main point of that question being that should you be afraid of the comments and the critique that people have? And I don't think that you should. I think that you should be attentive to what people are saying about things, but sometimes there is a time and a place to make decisions and say like, we think it should be this way, and maybe start to like change the way that people think that one thing should work, and
Right.
which a lot of times is very difficult to do, and it's always not always received very well in the beginning. But that's like when it comes to reading into that communication, like, is the communication just, this is really bad because it's different, or this is really bad because I can't use it?
Right.
And so I think there's like an attentiveness to what the feedback actually is that helps kind of guide those decisions.
Right. So, for you, being creative, is it difficult to be creative all the time? Meaning, do you run into stumbling blocks like those, when you just, I don't know, when you don't know what to do next? And if you run into them, how do you manage to get out of them?
I don't really run into that often. But I don't think that that's an uncommon thing. I think that every once in a while I might. But usually I have like sketchbooks full of ideas that I'm like, oh, this would be fun to do someday.
So you have enough ideas?
Yeah, I got enough ideas to keep me busy for the next couple of years. But I think that sometimes what's interesting to think about when you get into those positions where maybe like a design problem, or like you're working on something you don't really know, is to think, I don't know, sometimes like a small thing for me is like thinking about the opposite of that. Like thinking about like, okay, if we weren't trying to do this, or if we're trying to do this the wrong way, how would we do it? And kind of like working from the opposite perspective of like, how do we make this really communicative? Well, like, how do we make it so that people don't understand it? And then thinking about like, what are ways that you kind of see in those two positions?
Okay, so instead of maybe how to make it work, how to make it break.
Yeah, how to make it break. Yeah.
Okay, that's
All right. Break everything.
excellent. So, should we break more on the web?
Yeah, well,
Okay, this
where,
is good
yeah,
enough for me.
where
This
it's
one- that one
applicable.
here. Okay, we should break more. Oh, excellent. All right, thank you so much, Andrew. Looking
Yeah,
forward. Oh, you
absolutely.
spoke to it already.
Yeah, I spoke this morning.
See, I'm just living on this table,
Yeah, you're doing
Nowhere
a great
to go,
job.
no breaks, nothing. Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you
joining
very
us.
much.
All right, talk to
Appreciate
you
it.
soon.
Yep,
Excellent.
absolutely.
Great. So.